Hey friends, today's video is a complete guide on kombucha making. First up, we're going to talk about the SCOBY, what it is, why we need it, and how you can grow your own. Next, we're going to brew our own kombucha at home and save a lot of money in the process. And finally, we're going to flavor the kombucha and make it extra fizzy with second fermentation. Stay tuned to the very end for a little bonus recipe that uses the fruit from the second fermentation. You may have heard of the great probiotic benefits of kombucha, and maybe you even have gotten into a habit of buying kombucha and it's starting to get expensive. Well, luckily, making kombucha at home is not difficult. It takes some time, and in the beginning, you may need to get used to the steps involved in making kombucha, but let me assure you, over time, it will become second nature. I've been brewing my own kombucha for almost 7 years now, and it really is a mindless task for me now. Kombucha is one of the 4 fermented foods that I always make and have on hand for my family. The other ones are sauerkraut, be sure to check out that video, homemade yogurt, I have an Instant Pot recipe video for that up too, and sourdough bread. I'll be working on a video for that soon too. While we eat all the other ones, this is the only fermented drink I regularly make. The most important thing you need to prep ahead or acquire ahead of time is the kombucha SCOBY. So what is a SCOBY and why do we need it to make kombucha? Let me show you. This is what is called a SCOBY hotel. I'm saving extra SCOBYs here in this tea mixture. So you can see it's kind of this gelatinous film. It's also sometimes called a kombucha mushroom or the kombucha mother, and it is necessary to make kombucha. You can also see it here on top of my current kombucha batch. The name SCOBY is actually an acronym. It stands for Symbiotic Culture of Bacteria and Yeast. And that's exactly what it is, yeast and bacteria that work in a relationship to facilitate the kombucha fermentation process. With sauerkraut and other lactoferments, the fermentation happens spontaneously because the lactobacillus is present naturally on the outside of these vegetables. In order to ferment tea into kombucha, we need to introduce these bacteria and yeast. One of the most important parts of a SCOBY is a specific bacteria called Acetobacter xylanus. There's another name for it. I will not attempt to pronounce it. I will put it here on the screen though. And this specific bacteria is producing cellulose, which eventually forms the film that you see on top of kombucha brews. And this cellulose producing feature is one of the reasons you can actually see the microbial cultures that produce kombucha, unlike yogurt or sauerkraut where all of the action happens on a microscopic level. So, how do you get a SCOBY? The first option would be to check in with any of your friends that are brewing kombucha. From my kombucha batch, you can see that the SCOBY just keeps producing. If you would be nearby, I would gladly share a piece with you, and then you could quickly get started on brewing your own kombucha. The second option to also get you started faster on brewing kombucha is to check at your local health food store or maybe some online sites. You may be able to buy a piece of SCOBY in a little bit of kombucha liquid and get started that way. If neither of those are an option for you, keep watching this video. I'm going to show you how you can grow your own SCOBY. All you need for that is some strongly brewed black tea and some raw unflavored kombucha. Again, you can check in at a local health food store, but kombucha is also quite common in regular grocery store chains now, and it's quite expensive. So all of this is the first step to get you to brewing your own kombucha and saving a lot of money down the road. Ideally, the store-bought kombucha would be unflavored, and make sure that it says it's live or raw or active cultures. And if you can see on the bottom, the little floaties, that is the part we want. That is already the start of a SCOBY or a mother, and it's a sign of bacterial activity in your bottled kombucha. Make sure that the store-bought kombucha is not pasteurized. That process usually kills all bacterial activity and you won't have any success in growing the SCOBY. So once you've found your store-bought raw kombucha, let's get started with growing the SCOBY, because this process will take 3 to 4 weeks. So let's not waste any more time. We want to get you to brewing your own kombucha as soon as possible. So next we need to brew some strong tea. A 1/4 cup of granulated sugar. You can use simple white sugar or cane sugar. There's no need to get fancy here. This sugar is to feed the bacteria in the kombucha and will mostly be used up anyway. Add that to a jar together with about 1 tablespoon of loose leaf tea or 3 tea bags. Now add 2 cups of hot water. And stir everything together until the sugar dissolves. Now let the tea brew or steep until it cools down to room temperature. It will be quite strong black tea, but that is what is necessary to feed the culture that produces a SCOBY. So don't even try to use any kind of uncaffeinated. Even green tea is not recommended for growing your SCOBY. Later on, once you have your SCOBY, you can use green tea to make kombucha, but for growing a SCOBY, black tea is the best option. Once the tea has cooled down to room temperature, remove the tea bags or strain out the loose leaf tea. And now we need a jar or container to grow the SCOBY in. I like using this kind of glass bowl because it is circular and because it has a similar size to what my kombucha brewing vessel has. But you don't need to worry too much about the shape because eventually as you start brewing kombucha, it will grow and expand to cover the surface of whatever container you're using. To that bowl or jar, add your strong brewed tea and your 1 cup of raw kombucha, ideally with the floaties from the bottom of the jar included. Now cover it with a piece of paper towel or fabric and fasten it with a rubber band. Just make sure that you're not covering it airtight. Now place your jar or vessel somewhere off to the side in a cool, dark kitchen cabinet, and you can almost forget about it for the next 3 to 4 weeks. Of course, you'll probably want to check in on it regularly. If everything is working well, by around day 4, you should be seeing a thin gelatinous film forming on top of the liquid. And with time, that film will just keep getting thicker and thicker. You can start checking in on the thickness of it by around day 21 or 3 weeks. Once it reaches about a 1/4 inch in thickness, you are ready to start brewing your own kombucha. We'll go into the details of that in the next video. If you're not ready to brew kombucha yet, but you have your SCOBY, you can keep it in a SCOBY hotel, like I have here. These are actually my extras because as I'm brewing kombucha, the SCOBY just keeps growing and expanding, and the thicker it is, the faster the fermentation process. So regularly I divide my SCOBY. I take off layers either horizontally. You can also cut pieces off, but don't throw them away. I've only had it happen once, but during one of our moves, the covering of my kombucha jar must have shifted and some debris or impurities got in and my SCOBY started to grow mold. But luckily I had a backup in my SCOBY hotel, which is just the cellulose-like layers or gel films. And the liquid is strongly brewed tea, which of course turns into kombucha over time. Once in a while, maybe every 6 to 12 months, you can refresh the liquid inside to just keep feeding the cultures that are in this hotel. Otherwise, I have it in the back of my pantry and just leave it there to set and forget, just in case I need it. And because the SCOBY hotel is sealed off airtight with lid, it doesn't continuously keep producing new SCOBYs at the top layer. We're just maintaining and keeping alive the extra SCOBYs from our large batch of kombucha. And this is how you grow your own SCOBY. I wish you great success at growing your own SCOBY, or maybe you have gotten one from a kombucha brewing friend. You can also check in at your local health food store, or you may even be able to acquire it online. Usually they come in a little sealed pouch with a little bit of kombucha tea and a piece of SCOBY inside. And now with the SCOBY ready, we can go ahead and start brewing our own kombucha. The rest of the ingredients are quite simple. We need water, sugar, and loose leaf tea or some tea bags. You can use black, green, or white tea as long as it is caffeinated and from the actual tea plant family. And you also need a large vessel to brew your tea in. You can see mine back here. It is a large gallon-sized glass jar and it has the dispenser spout. The tap is not necessary, but it sure makes it easy to transfer the finished kombucha in the end. In the summertime, when we crave refreshing, bubbly kombucha more, I usually brew the full gallon all the time. In the wintertime, not as much, and then I usually do half a gallon only, but I still do it in the same jar. So let's get started with brewing our tea. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you the amounts for making half a gallon or 2 liters of kombucha, but you can easily double everything to make a full gallon or 4 liters. First up, we need half a cup of granulated sugar. Usually I use white or cane sugar, and all of this or most of it will be used up by the bacteria and yeast anyway. This is just to feed them, so no need to get fancy here. To that, add 1 tablespoon of loose leaf black, green, or white tea, or alternatively use 2 to 3 tea bags. Now over top of the tea and sugar, pour 2 cups of hot, previously boiled water. I like to make a tea concentrate with just 2 cups of hot water instead of boiling all of the water, because then it will all cool down faster and I can move on to the next step sooner. Stir everything up so that the sugar dissolves, and then let the tea or tea bags steep until they're fully infused into the water and let it cool down to room temperature. Now we need to get our fermentation vessel ready. I'm using this gallon-sized glass jar with a spout, and when I'm just starting out or every second or third batch or so, I like to clean everything out thoroughly by washing it with dish soap or vinegar. And if you have the dispenser spout in your jar, be sure to disassemble that and clean the seal and inside of the spout as well. And then when using loose leaf tea, be sure to use a fine mesh strainer when pouring the concentrated tea mixture into your fermentation jar. Otherwise, with tea bags, just simply remove them, squeeze out some of the concentrated tea liquid and discard them. Now fill in 5 cups of filtered water, just cool or room temperature, and also add half a cup of starter kombucha. If you're just starting out, you may need to use that from a store-bought bottle of unflavored kombucha. And then in subsequent batches, just always reserve about half a cup for your next batch. And finally, we need our SCOBY, either store-bought, maybe you got a piece from a friend, or if you followed my previous video, homegrown. Place the SCOBY on top of the tea mixture. Don't worry exactly how it's placed. It may first float around a bit, but eventually it will end up on top. If you got a piece of SCOBY that is a lot bigger than your fermentation vessel, then you can cut it to about the diameter of the jar. And don't worry if it's a little bit smaller. You don't want it super small, but if it's just a little bit less, eventually during the fermentation process, new layers of SCOBY film will form to completely cover the surface area. Now, to protect our brew during the fermentation duration, we want to cover it loosely with either a piece of paper towel, napkin, or a fabric cloth and fasten it with an elastic band. We don't want to close it up airtight because oxygen is needed for the fermentation process. We just want to protect it from impurities, dust, debris, or insects. Now let your kombucha tea mixture sit to ferment for 7 to 21 days. There are different factors that will influence the length of time. First up, there's the temperature. The warmer it is, the faster the fermentation process. Also, the thicker your SCOBY, the faster everything works. At the 5-day mark, start to taste your kombucha. It should not taste like sweetened tea anymore, but should have a distinct tart kombucha flavor. And then also your personal taste preferences come in. Some people like just very mild kombucha with mild fermentation flavor, while others prefer a much tarter, more acidic kombucha. So that will of course take longer. Once you have finished brewing your kombucha, it is at a flavor and tartness level that you enjoy. You can drink it as is, as unflavored kombucha. You can fill it into bottles and store it in the fridge. That way you can get started on your next batch already. But if you prefer extra fizzy flavored kombucha, then keep watching this video and I will show you how to achieve that. I'm going to show you how you can use fruit juices and spices to flavor your kombucha. I'm going to share some of my favorite flavors as well as a guideline for the amounts of your favorite flavorings to add so that you can get started with different flavor combination and experimentation as well. Aside from homebrewed kombucha and your flavoring materials, we also need flip-top bottles. These are a couple of options here. The key part of this is that the tops have a rubber seal that tightly fits on top and completely seals off the bottles. Any screw top lids usually don't provide that same kind of seal. You can purchase different colors and sizes of flip-top bottles online. I'm going to put a link below as well. But check your grocery store for any drinks that are sold in flip-top bottles that you could then reuse at home for kombucha brewing. I've purchased flip-top bottles before, but all of those have broken by now. So all the ones I have right now are actually recycled or upcycled. This bottle is from some German beer that one of the fancier grocery stores in our town sells. And this one was actually some artisan French lemonade. We enjoyed those beverages first, and now I'm using these bottles for couple of years already, and they're perfect to just wash out and reuse over and over. The amount of the flavoring agent that you're going to use depends on the size of the bottle and the amount of kombucha that you're using for secondary fermentation. This is a liter or quart-sized bottle, whereas this smaller one only holds about 1/3 of a liter. So while I use about 1/4 cup of either cut up fruit or fruit juice for the large bottle, for this smaller one I would only use about 1.5 tablespoons. Also be sure to always leave some headspace. Some people leave about a finger length up until here. This is to allow for some expansion as the bubbles escape while you are burping your bottles during secondary fermentation. You don't want to have overflowing kombucha every time you do that. So including flavoring agents, the secondary fermentation amount should only reach until about the bottom of the neck. Fill your flip-top bottles about 3/4 of the way with ready brewed kombucha. You can also start with a flavoring agent, the order doesn't really matter. My 3 absolutely most favorite kombucha flavorings are pineapple, mango and guava, and raspberry ginger. We don't have fruit juices in the house very much, that's why we tend to use mostly fresh or frozen fruit. Let's start with the mango and guava. I use about 2 tablespoons each of fresh chopped up mango and guava and add them to the kombucha. Frozen fruit works just as well. Here I'm adding 3 tablespoons of frozen raspberries and 3 to 4 slices of fresh ginger. And by far the most used flavoring agent in our household are frozen pineapple chunks. We usually have them in the freezer and it makes really delicious kombucha. The flavor is a nice balance of sweet and tart, and it works really well at carbonating kombucha and making it extra fizzy and delicious. After adding the flavoring agent, you can close the bottle, top it up with some more kombucha if there's room, and give it a bit of a shake so that any fruit pieces that may be stuck on the sides of the walls or in the neck can get washed down, because if they're not submerged in liquid, they may start to mold. Instead of fresh fruit chunks, you can also use fruit juice, about 1/4 cup for 1 liter or 1 quart of kombucha. And then let the bottle sit at room temperature for anywhere from 2 to up to 5 days. It mostly depends on the sugar content of your add-ins. If they're higher in sugar content, then the kombucha will become carbonated and fizzy very fast, whereas lower sugar add-ins may take longer. Be sure to burp your bottles or flip them open, which is to remove any excess CO2. We don't want the pressure to build up too high inside of the bottles. So usually over the sink, I flip them open to release any built up carbonation. Do this about once a day, and then you can also taste the kombucha once it is at a level of carbonation that you enjoy. You can close the bottle and store them in the fridge for the next week or 2. It may last longer, but keep in mind that the fermentation process will continue, so more carbonation will build up, so be careful when flipping them after leaving a longer time. And also the kombucha may become more tart and more acidic if you let it sit longer. Now to enjoy your kombucha, pour it in a glass, over ice if you prefer. If you have fruit chunks in the bottles, you may want to pour over a fine mesh sieve to remove the fruit pieces. But don't throw them out. I'm going to show you a quick bonus recipe that you can make with the leftover fruit bits. I usually add them to a container in my freezer and store them until I have a full quart-sized deli container full. And this just barely scratches the surface of the possibilities that you have with flavoring kombucha. Some other ideas are in making chai-spiced kombucha. Add maybe a teaspoon of sugar just to get the carbonation going, and then add a combination of chai spices from cinnamon, cloves, cardamom, nutmeg to up to about 1/2 teaspoon in total for a quart of kombucha. Also try some fresh or dried lavender with blueberries. A nice Christmas flavored kombucha would be orange juice, cranberries, and cloves. And one of my personal favorites is a 1/4 cup of fresh pear chunks with a couple cloves and a crushed pod of cardamom. And this is how you flavor and carbonate your kombucha with secondary fermentation. And now on to repurposing your kombucha flavoring fruit. Once you have strained it out of your kombucha, instead of discarding the fruit pieces, you can make a sort of kombucha jam. I collect them in the freezer, and once I have a big container full of them, I add them to a saucepan together with some sugar. I usually weigh the amount and use about half the weight of the fruit in sugar, so anywhere from 1/2 cup to a cup. and then let it simmer until all the fruit is softened. This really depends on the type of fruit you're using. I have here a combination of loquat, pineapple, apples, and strawberries. Because of the high amount of apples, it actually cooked quite fast. If it's mostly pineapple, it will take longer. And then I puree everything with the immersion blender until smooth and let it cool down, and then transfer it to glass jars and store in the fridge. And just look at this, something that would have usually been a waste product and discarded now made me a jar and a half of homemade jam. And it makes a great spread on bread. I also like it to flavor and sweeten my oatmeal and yogurt. And if you're like me and always have a variety of kombucha flavors, then the flavor of your kombucha jam will also always vary. When straining the flavored kombucha, I try to keep mostly the fruit only. If I have used spices as well, I will try to pick them out because they can become too overwhelming if blended up into jam. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your kombucha and fermentation loving friends. And I will see you soon again with another delicious recipe. Bye for now.